The biggest secrets during World War II, most of you probably don't even remember, was the Norden bomb site and a project called Magic. Now, Magic has been the subject of God knows how many movies, novels, documentaries, and does anybody here know what Magic was about? Yeah. It was the code breaking, yes. And the people who worked on that, when they were taken into the project, they were told simply, if you mention this even to your wife, we'll shoot you. It was that secret. The Norden bomb site enabled airplanes at 30,000 feet to drop a bomb down a smokestack. In the pre-computer days, it was a computer. Now, everybody thinks that the atomic bomb was the biggest secret, and it wasn't. A lot of people knew about it. One of the great legends of the science fiction world is that in 1944, a science fiction magazine came out with a story that gave all the details of the atom bomb. And the story went on that the FBI rushed around to all the newsstands and bought up all the copies of this magazine. Well, if they did that, then a copy of that magazine would be worth $100,000 today if you could find one, right? So get out your wallets. It was called Astounding Science Fiction, and it was March 1944, over a year before we started dropping atom bombs. Actually, they did not collect copies of this from the newsstands, but they did, after about 2 weeks after the magazine came out on the newsstands, the author of this story, heard a knock on his door, and it was the FBI. And they came and they said, where the hell did you get all this information? And he showed them. He had science magazines and so on, and he had put it together from stuff that had been published in obscure scientific journals and journals for physicists and things. In the 1940s, the late 1940s, 1945, the Japanese didn't have an atom bomb. So they came up with something that only the Japanese could have thought of. First of all, they discovered the jet stream. The Japanese made up balloons out of paper. And they made up these 30-foot balloons. And they had all of the teenagers and children of Japan making these balloons. And they launched 10,000 of them against the United States from Japan. And they were armed with bombs. And the idea was that they would fly across the Pacific on the jet stream, and they would drop their bombs on the United States. Well, these balloons were called Fugo balloons, which means fire balloons. And some of these bombs actually did reach the United States. And that's a whole other story. There are books devoted to that, written by aviation historians. When the war ended, and we discovered, well, we knew the Japanese were sending over the balloons, and just a year ago, the New York Times revealed the Japanese ultimate plan was to put diseases in these balloons, like anthrax, and send that to the United States. But they never got that far.
Very curious about, since the Fugo balloons, since it was so secret and the government didn't make any statement, how did they manage to keep it secret when they were found, when they actually...
Because, as I said, the FBI or the Army would go into where the balloon was found, and they would tell everybody, listen, we don't want the Japanese to know that this reached us. And there are books filled with pictures of all this. There are many books on this. Undoubtedly, a lot of these balloons caused some of the flying saucer sightings because they were reflective, so that they would reflect the heat of the sun. If they didn't, they would go too high and they'd explode. I've been a government consultant off and on all my life. When I was 23 years old, I was working for the Department of Army in a radio station. In the early 1970s, I took a job with HEW. The first thing that baffled me was why and this is 25 years ago, why everything cost twice as much for the government. If the government was, say, buying a rubber stamp that cost you 50 cents, the government would pay $5 for the same rubber stamp. And I found out very quickly why. It costs the government so much because the government is so slow in paying. If government buys toilet seats from a manufacturer, it takes them a year or 2 years to pay the manufacturer. And meanwhile, he's got to meet his expenses. So he charges them, instead of charging them $4.95 for a toilet seat, he charges them $500 for a toilet seat. One big project of Social Security was they put out a comic book in Spanish. And they printed 100,000 of these. And they distributed 5,000 of these comic books, which cost a fortune. It was a huge staff to put it together. And they ultimately got rid of less than 5,000 of them. Anybody have a question here?
Yeah, what were the secrets that the airport...
The secret is all money. They don't want us to know how much anything costs. They tell you that we're now building 30 stealth bombers at $1 billion a piece, but then with the cost overruns and everything, when it's all, they really don't know what any of this stuff costs.